Hello there, everyone, and welcome back to Autism Demystified. I am your host, Dr. Vladimir Barayev, a general pediatrician specializing in autism care for children. Today, we have a very special guest that I would love to welcome on our show, Dr. Joanne Gerenser. She is the executive director of the Eden 2 programs, a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing services for individuals with autism. With over 35 years of experience, that's 3.5 decades plus, in the field of autism and special education, Dr. Gerenser is a leading expert in applied behavior analysis therapy and communication interventions for individuals with autism. She received her master's degree in speech and hearing sciences at the Ohio State University and her PhD in speech and hearing science from the City University of New York Graduate Center. She's an adjunct associate professor at Brooklyn College. Dr. Gerenser has published numerous articles and book chapters and is a frequent presenter at national and international conferences. In addition to her leadership at Eden 2, she is deeply involved in advocacy and research aimed at improving outcomes for individuals on the autism spectrum. So I'd like to welcome and thank you so much, Dr. Gerenser, for joining us today.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay. We mentioned the Eden 2 programs, which are vast and address individuals and help individuals across the lifespan. But I want to just focus in on the educational component, early childhood education and life of a child with autism. How do you feel that educating children with autism is different than educating a neurotypical child?
Well, children with autism, when they're born, what the research tells us is that there are differences in the way they process the environment, and we believe it's from pretty much from the beginning of life or from very early on. And the job that we try and do with young children is look at the environment and try and adjust the environment in ways so that they can start to process the world a little bit more in the way that neurotypical children do, mainly for the purposes of being able to learn language and to learn social skills. It's not that we're trying to eradicate autism. What we're trying to do is make sure that young children with autism have the ability to learn and reach their potential. And that involves being able to individually look at each child and understand how they're processing the environment.
Are there specific strategies that you implement at your institution that help support children? Can you give us an example of how that would work in a real life scenario?
Sure. So we use a methodology called applied behavior analysis. It's a methodology that has evolved over the last 30, 40 years to be a very fluid, very individualized model of treatment. And, with 1 2.5-year-old, we might set the program up to teach them to attend to social information over non-social. So we want them to look where people are looking. We want them to learn to look at people. We want them to learn to respond to the right contingencies. So when somebody smiles at them, they understand that they've done something that the other person really likes. And so it's really important that young children learn to look and attend to the people in their environment, because that's how they're going to learn language. We do a lot of what's called shaping. We do a lot of differential reinforcement. So when you're doing things naturally that are going to get you more. So when you are looking at people, you get more from us, as opposed to when you're avoiding the social information.
Absolutely. So like if their attention isn't directed in a particular way towards adults and other people in the room, there's a lot of learning opportunities that just fly over their head, and they're not able to absorb and integrate that with what they already know. Is that correct?
Yes. And it's why it's so important to start as early as possible. So the goal is just to try and get them to learn more naturally from the environment. And to do that, the earlier you start, the more likely you will be able to teach them those tools.
So at a school like Eden 2, how is the curriculum tailored to help support children with autism in their learning journey?
Well, it's really not the curriculum will be very dependent upon the individual, right? Remember, autism is this incredible spectrum. And underneath autism lies other issues such as intellectual disabilities or anxiety disorders, uh, other types of things will underlie it. And so the first thing we do is really try and get a good, clear picture of each individual learner that we're working with. It's not easy when you're dealing with very young children because they may not have language skills. They may be very difficult to test. But we very carefully look at each child. And then again, the beginning is teaching the child how to learn. And so it may be that we're teaching them to imitate others. They may not naturally imitate others. That's a skill that neurotypical infants and toddlers learn very quickly. They're quickly imitating people in their environment. That tells you that they're looking at people in their environment. Whereas many young children with autism, that doesn't come naturally. So that's an important skill, teaching them to imitate others, teaching them to vocalize and to use vocalizations to communicate. So, one of the problems we see in many young children with autism is they don't seem to understand the very basic nature of communicating with another person to get something. So we try and really work on those skills. We want them to learn how to follow directions. And the reason we care about that is that means they're listening to people, right? And so we teach those type of skills very early on.
I want to piggyback off something you said before we go on to our next question. Is that the children have difficulty asking for things, using communication to request things. Some of the examples that I have seen that go directly to that point. For parents to get a clearer picture of what does it mean that a child has difficulty asking for things. As one example that comes to top of mind that I hear parents often tell me is that my child will not point to a cookie that they want that's in the cabinet. What they'll do is they'll take me by the hand and they'll walk me there.
Right.
And depending on the severity of how much they are affected by autism, where they are on the spectrum, those types of requests will vary. Can you give parents any other things to look out for when a child struggles to request, or what a typical situation of requesting would look like, and levels of frustration that will come with it?
Yeah, so you hit the nail right on the head, right? The child that doesn't point to what they want, the reason a toddler points to what they want, they don't do it in isolation. They don't do it in a vacuum, right? If there's nobody in the room, a 2-year-old won't point to what they want. It's about the concept of communicating. And so when there's an adult or another child or somebody in the room and the neurotypical child wants something, they'll point to the object and then they'll look at the person. That is called joint attention, right? And that is called triadic communication. I'm looking at the object and I'm looking at you. That is communication. Taking somebody's hand and leading them to the object is having the effect of communication, but it is not communication. And so what we try and tell parents early on, because again, the real most important part of early education for children with autism is involving the parents, getting them to be partners in the education that we do. And so we try and work with parents because they have the most interactions. They have the most natural opportunities to change behavior so that children are benefiting more from the environment. So when the child grabs your hand and takes you to what they want, you have a real opportunity there because now you know what they want. And so we then don't give it to them right away. We just take their hand and we form a point. And when the point is there, then we say, oh, you want the cookie? Okay. And so we try and shape that pointing in the natural environment. Eventually we'll pair the pointing with vocalizations, and as we're working on sound and speech, hopefully we can pair those together and they can start using words to communicate.
And would you please, for the benefit of our listeners, help to illustrate the frequency with which, when they cannot get what they are interested in, if they want the cookie, then they're not able to communicate. How often does that cause that child to have tantrums?
Yeah, I mean, listen, here's the thing. I just saw a child just 30 minutes ago who's having a lot of tantrums. And the reason he's having a lot of tantrums is he's 5 years old. His intellect and his internal language are very far ahead of his ability to communicate. It's very frustrating when you're trying to tell people what you want and people are not responding to you. So for us, really getting kids more effective at communicating, even if it's just a point in the beginning, will greatly reduce the level of tantrums that you're going to see in children. It's just very frustrating to not be able to effectively communicate.
Yeah, I tell people, imagine trying to tell someone there's a fire in the building over there and someone put a muzzle over your mouth and you can't speak. How you're going to try to get someone, how frustrated and how frantic you would look
Yep,
if that happened to you.
exactly.
Um, Thank you for that. So now we have the privilege and honor of living in New York City with a very large Department of Education, one of the largest school systems in the universe. And a lot of children go through that system, including children who are neurotypical and children with varying levels of autism. What advice can you give parents about the process with which kids are placed in appropriate educational environments, particularly with autism, and how a parent would know if their child is in an environment which will allow their child to show their full potential, or if they will have to seek um, additional support for their child with autism? What
Yeah,
are the signs that you would recommend? We could spend days talking about this one subject, but you can start wherever you'd like.
it is a very, very complex question, but it's a really good one for families, right? So first and foremost, the school district, the whether it's District 31, has to do a comprehensive evaluation. I just met with a family for whom that didn't happen, and yet the child is now placed. And so parents have to become, you would not take your car to get it repaired and just get a bill not knowing what they did to your car, not knowing what was wrong with your car, right? So if you treat your car that way, you want to be sure you understand that your complex child needs that same level of attention, if not significantly more. So you want to be sure, first and foremost, that you get a comprehensive evaluation and report. What are your child's strengths? Where is your child struggling? And that report should then lead to an individualized education plan, right? Those goals on the plan should then lead to placement. It should not be the other way around, which unfortunately it is, right? Placement doesn't drive the IEP. IEP drives placement. Because you want to be sure that the place that your child is in has the ability to meet his IEP goals, his or her IEP goals. So first, you get a good assessment. Uh, Ideally, you can remember there's two ways to look at a child. You get what's called a diagnosis, which is what you would get from somebody like you or a neurologist, right? But when you get to the education world, you get a classification. And that can be very different. It can be other health impaired, it can be speech, but the classification drives placement. So you want to be sure that you've got the right classification. I tell parents all the time, don't be afraid of the classification, because number one, if they don't need it later, they won't have it. But if they do need it, it drives all the services that he or she needs. So if the diagnosis is autism, don't be afraid of an autism classification. Now, for preschoolers, it's preschooler with a disability, which because it doesn't, but once you get 5, you really need to have the right classification. So that's the first process, right? The second process is that now your child is placed. If your child can't sit in a chair for more than a minute or two, then he or she cannot be in a class without the right kind of staff, because they're just going to wander around. They're not going, um, it for me, and now it may only be a short period of time where they learn to sit, they learn to learn. And, my preschool, for example, has 6 to 1 to 3. It has 8 to 1 to 3, and it has 12 to 1 to 2, right? That means 6 kids, 4 staff. Next up, it's 8 kids, 4 staff. Then it's 12 kids, 3 staff. A lot of our kids will start in the 6 to 1 to 3, And once they learn to sit and they learn to understand contingencies and their behaviors don't interfere so much with learning in small groups, they move to the 8. Once they and they learn in that, where now you have 2 to 1, sometimes 3 to 1, right? 3 kids to 1 staff, and they're still learning, then they'll move to the 12. Once they're in the 12, then they are learning in large groups. That's what you're going to need if you're ever going to go into a gen ed setting, right? You have to be able to learn from an instructor that's in front of the room, not your aide that's sitting right next to you, right? That's not going to be the way. The aide's job is to teach you to learn from the teacher in front of the room. The second thing that I think is really important is this concept of what's called a function-based approach to behaviors. So why is my child tantruming? You have to be able to explain to me why he's tantruming. Why is he spitting at people? Why is he trying to run out of the room? And we can determine that by using a function-based approach to behavior. We can assess to say, oh, we've done an assessment and it's clear to us that Johnny's running out of the room to get out of doing the work. Now, what does that mean? It means that we fix the work. Doesn't mean that we punish the child. It means there's something about the work we're doing with him that he doesn't like. So how do we make him like it? How do we make, maybe it's too hard. Maybe he doesn't have the prerequisite skills. Maybe we're not using the right reinforcement. But that's what's critical, right? Those are the critical things. And then obviously a program that will help build social skills and build communication. You're supposed to be getting updates and reports. You want to make sure that your child is making progress on the IEP. Remember, they wrote this IEP. If the child is not making progress on the IEP, they're not doing the right thing. It's not the child's fault. They wrote the IEP, therefore they made the assumption that these were achievable goals. So it's really important that you get those updates.
Okay, you mentioned a very powerful word, and that was beautiful. I love how you said, I'm gonna use that when I speak to families as well. Like the IEP should be driving your child's placement, and not the placement driving what type of IEP they receive. And you mentioned an emotion, which a lot of these conversations are quite emotional with families.
Yeah.
And the first emotion that comes up is fear. So they're afraid that you are going to when a child is placed in an academic environment, they're afraid that the objective here is, oh, we're gonna, if they're in a 6 to 1 to 3, they're gonna stay that way, rather than, oh, we put them in there to help them make progress that they can effectively go into a class of 8 or class of 12. Can you speak to that fear, parent? How do you help to alleviate that concern that, oh, my child's going to be in such a restrictive environment, they're never going to be able to make much progress because of the challenges that they have?
Yeah, so I would remind parents that we're required by law to place a child in the least restrictive environment. I actually worry that it happens the other way more. I worry that parents don't want their kids to be in these smaller settings because they think it makes them look, or they're acknowledging that they might be more challenged. So they place them in these 12s, in these general education type environments when they're not ready. And then they start to develop problems. This is exactly what I saw today with this child. The reason we looked at him today is because he's having these incredible tantrums now in school. And he's in a 12 to 1 classroom, and they're not able to manage his problem behaviors because they don't have the right staffing. And so when you can't manage them, they get worse because they get out of the class, they get what they want, and they get worse. So to me, it always is, if I think, if I just look at it like this: if your child can't sit in a chair for even a minute, they're not going to be able to learn in anything less than 2 kids to 1 staff. They just won't. You can't teach somebody by chasing them around the room, right? And so if your child can't sit, they need the smallest classroom available. But the number one goal is for us to teach them to sit and to get them into the next environment. And so I would always look at the IEP and say, well, where's the goals that are working on attending? Where's the goals that are working on teaching him to learn in a 2 to 1, right? Where's the goals that are saying he can sit in a group of 3? Those should be on the IEP.
Absolutely. Speaking of goals, parents often tell me, yes, we go to IEP meetings, we have goals set out. Can you help guide families on what how these goals should actually look like, how they should be articulated? Is it better to have very vague goals or more specific ones with that are like time restricted of how long we expect the goal to be accomplished, versus just going to meetings and saying, "Oh, your child has been such a sweetheart and so wonderful and lovely," but yet they are making zero academic progress one year after the next after the next. Like when you hear that kind of a story, what is the next steps that a parent should take?
Well, remember, parents are um, part of the IEP process, right? They're part of the IEP team. And so they need to become educated. They need to learn about things like what should be on an IEP. I do not believe in vague IEP goals. Again, let's go back to the car. If the mechanic says, yes, I'll fix your car, or no, better yet, I'll service your car. And then when you get your car, it's still not working. And they're like, well, I serviced it, right? I did what I said I would do. So you don't have anything to argue with me about. But if they said, I am going to change your spark plugs, I am going to put new windshield wiper fluid in, I'm going to rotate your tires, and I'm going to wash the car, you can see whether those things were done or not, right? And if those things weren't done, they didn't meet the contract. And so the same thing is true with your child. They should be writing goals so that you can determine whether they were met or not. So Johnny will learn to follow a minimum of 10 one-step commands. I can see whether he learned that or not. Johnny will be able to answer WH questions at least 90% of the time. Susie will be able to read passages and answer informational questions about those passages at least 90% of the time. Wherever that child is in their journey, the IEP goals should be measurable. We do it in Gen Ed, right? Kids take these standardized tests, and the reason they take the standardized tests is to see whether the teaching that we've done has actually taught them what they need to learn.
Absolutely. The other concern that families have is that if they find that their child is in a more restrictive setting, that somehow they have failed being able to be in a more in a larger setting for their kids. There's this feeling of like, oh, something more is wrong with my child, and that how do you speak to those concerns, like that
Well,
it's not really a failure versus it's just the reality of what a child actually needs and level of support?
right. So our number one priority, our number one goal when we take a child or when we start working with a child is to work towards the I'm sorry, there was alarm. The number one goal is to work towards the best possible quality of life for this individual. And we think that when they're two, right? I've been working with kids with autism for close to 40 years. When I see a 2-year-old now, I don't see a 2-year-old, I see a 32-year-old. And I say to myself, what do I need to do? I don't know if that 2-year-old is going to go to college. I don't know if that 2-year-old is going to need support for 24 hours a day for the rest of his life. But what I do know is that I am going to work very hard so that this child will have the best quality of life. You just have to understand that if we're doing the IEP right, and if we're writing the right goals, those goals should lead towards that quality of life. And that means that if we can get them to move to the 8s and the 12s and back to general education, that's great. But placing a child that's not ready or capable into general education isn't going to achieve the best quality of life. Remember, right now, outcomes in autism are not great, right? They are the most or underemployed population of people with developmental and intellectual disabilities. People with Down syndrome and moderate intellectual disabilities are more employed than people with autism who may have graduated college, because we hadn't worked on the right things. We hadn't, they passed their academics. Yes, they're smart. Everybody can say, okay, he passed, he graduated high school, he graduated college, but we never worked on the social skills that he needs to navigate the real world. We never worked on the adaptive behavior skills so that he can function in the real world, right? So, I mean, listen, I have kids who have profound autism, who are uh, working, they're independent, they have a social life, they have a recreational life, they use an augmentative system to communicate, but they're doing really well. And I have kids that graduated college, that one of my families just called me and said her son just got engaged. So the outcomes, to me, they're both excellent, right? The idea is promote independence, promote positive, healthy interactions, and let them have the best quality of life for them.
Self-fulfillment is the
Yeah,
goal.
right.
Make sure that they reach what they want to accomplish
Correct.
without us getting in the way with our expectations or with our inappropriate placements that will inhibit them from reaching their true potentials.
That's right. But helping guide them. Listen, I can't sing at all. And if I was
You need it.
12 years old and I wanted to be an opera singer, people would have counseled me out of that. As much as I'm saying, let them be what they want, let them be what they want, but let them be successful. So if they're telling me they want to be an opera singer, but they can't sing, I have to help them learn to be something better, something different. If they don't have certain skills, like they can't tolerate certain environments, then getting a job that unfortunately puts you in that environment won't be successful. So being able to really help them get to the best possible outcome involves letting them follow their own path, but also guiding them when you know that path is just not going to work.
Are there resources that you recommend to families so they can educate themselves better on the IEP process and what kind of things they should expect during these meetings, or is it a case by case basis?
Well, there's a tremendous amount there. Unfortunately, there used to be the parent to parent. There used to be an actual center here on Staten Island that helped guide parents, especially during those critical early years. So, I mean, I would, the internet will provide you a tremendous amount of detail on what should be in an IEP. I would read the IDEA. It's written in a way that parents can understand it. You have to be the advocate. Parents have to be the ones to hold the school district accountable. They can't assume that the school district is always going to do the right thing.
So you mentioned the IDEA. Over the past several weeks, I've spoken to professionals such as yourself who have expressed a lot of concern about the federal legal landscape with special education and how it will affect students here in New York State. Regardless of what happens, though, what do you recommend families keep in mind, whether we still have a Department of Education federally or not in the future? It remains to be seen, but if parents are appropriately involved, they will do X, Y, and Z. What are those recommendations? Like, how will they stay involved?
Well, so it's interesting, right? They may or may not get rid of the Department of Education, but they can't get rid of the laws that protect the students,
Okay.
right? So even though I'm not part officially, or some schools are not officially part of the public school system, we're still required to follow the federal law. So it is my hope and understanding that even if they eliminate the federal Department of Education, that should not. Now, I could be wrong. It's something that I probably need to take a better look at, because but I just don't think they can overturn the law, the federal statutes, that easily, right? And so that's where the protection lies. It's in that federal law, and that's pretty. I think that would be hard to overturn.
Okay, that makes me feel a little better now.
Well, I'm going to do my homework though, because I want to make sure I'm right.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I will do the same. I will continue investigating this and learning more about how we can best advocate for kids. That if certain protections are not in place, what do we have to do then? Because
Right.
regardless of what happens, we wake up the next morning, we still have to go to work. We still have to put our boots on and still help kids make progress one way
Yeah,
or another. So can you please share with us how how everyone can learn more about Eden 2 and all the wonderful programs that you offer?
sure. So we have a number of things. One is our website. You can go to our website. And I urge you to go to our website because we've got funding from our city council through an autism initiative grant to provide a tremendous number of free webinars on topics that range from being able to take your son or daughter on vacations in a more successful way to things like how to make sure your IEP is effective. So if you go to our website, www.eden2.org, you can find all sorts of information about autism, but also about these webinars that we host that are free all throughout the year. So that's really one of the things I urge you to do.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I want all of our listeners to do, to learn, to go to their website. We're going to have it linked to the bottom of our
Right.
show notes so people can access it directly from this show. Dr. Gerenser, do you have any final words? Because this has been quite informative and a wonderful conversation with you. I thank you so much for sharing your extremely valuable time with us, with all of your decades of experience and helping children thrive in the community. Are there any final words that you wish to share with us?
Well, I mean, I think the last thing I would say is on the internet now, you might start to see some negative discussions about ABA. And I just want to urge families to understand what it really is, because right now there's a lot of information that is coming through the internet that is not scientifically validated or evidence-based. And we know without question that good ABA is the key to getting kids with autism started on a path to the best possible life they can have. And until something better comes along, I urge you to really understand what it is and not deprive your child of these really great opportunities.
Absolutely. I want to second that. I had an ABA therapist from A Friendly Face come and talk about the evolution of ABA over time and how, yes, back in its heyday, there were practices in ABA which may have been very restrictive for children, caused them a significant amount of stress. That is not the type of ABA that is practiced generally
Correct.
today. It
Correct.
is not coercive. It is not. It does not violate them as human beings, enforcing them to do things that they don't want to do. It does not take away their identity. It does not force them to do things that are uncomfortable for them. It is all about finding something that reinforces behaviors that we want to have them do, what Dr. Gerenser called shaping. And parents, keep in mind, old ABA is not the same thing as the way that ABA is being done today. It is a much more fluid and a gentle approach to helping kids make progress. Maybe
Yeah.
gentle is not the right word, but it's more, it's less restrictive and less not as structured as it used
It's
to be.
very individualized.
Yeah.
And to be perfectly honest, I think it allows them to express their identity. It allows them to be successful.
Absolutely, absolutely. So thank you so very much for joining us today.
Yeah.
Once again, my name is Dr. Vladimir Barayev, autism pediatrician, and the name of our show is Autism Demystified, answering all of our listeners' questions. Families who are looking for a pediatrician to help them navigate autism can contact my office at the number below. And everyone have a wonderful day. And Dr. Gerenser, thank you. Have a wonderful day as well.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.